Hello, y'all. I had a client and participant in True Power, who's also a dear friend, ask me a question that I've heard come up with many of my clients over the years. And I wanted to address it because I think that there's a lot more people than her out there who are wanting the answer to this. So I'm going to read the question and then I'm going to share my thoughts on it. Her question is, right now, I feel like I need to comfort myself 20 to 30 times a day. Healing is taking so much of my day. I feel like I'm constantly working on myself in a variety of ways in order to prevent myself from going to or staying in yellow and red zones. The constant work I'm doing varies from comforting my inner child, watching relevant videos, looking through notes from our calls to find the tool that will work for my needs for that day, releasing emotions, journaling, meditating, reading self-help books, taking long baths, doing yoga, doing guided meditations, anything to try to help me stay in green zone. While I do recognize the progress I've made, especially the fact that I don't wait until I'm completely overwhelmed to do self-care anymore, still, in order to just keep me in green zone / top of yellow zone lately, I need to do a ton of preventative maintenance. My questions are, does the baseline of happiness, gratitude / green zone increase, or is this really it? I'm staying near a 7 regularly, dropping down to a 5 or 6, and doing so much work to keep me from going any lower. Is it likely that my baseline number will increase to an 8, 9, or 10 so that I'm only dropping down to a 7 before I start to add in self-care tools? Does this get any easier and become less time consuming? Right now, the amount of work I have to do to keep at a 7 is a little discouraging for me. Looking forward to your wisdom. Okay, so I have a lot that I want to say about this. First thing is that it is very hard for us to be aware of our own progress because the nature of transformation is that long-lasting, sustainable progress is slow. When we have these breakthrough epiphany moments, if we're not doing the consistent work to keep them in place, like a rubber band, we're going to snap back to the way that we were before. Long-term sustainable progress requires consistently putting in work every single day. And if you are over the age of 30 and you've been doing this work for about 5 years consistently, just think about how much time in your life before you started on your transformational path. Right? In those formative years, we were forming neural pathways and strengthening the myelin sheath in those neural pathways for years and years and years and years, right? The way that our brain works is that every time you have a certain thought process, it strengthens the myelin sheath in the neural pathways, which is like adding insulation, so that when a brain impulse goes off in your brain, it's going to take that pathway because that's the most insulated pathway. So what you're doing when you're doing this transformational work is you're re-hardwiring your entire brain that you formed over decades and decades and decades. So to think that we can re-hardwire in less than 10% of the time that we took to hardwire is probably a little bit unrealistic. It won't take as long to re-hardwire, but it does take quite a long time. And when we think about it from the perspective of parts work, these exiled parts, these parts that are the source of our stress because they feel that their worthiness and lovability and belonging and respectability is contingent upon external validation, these exiled parts need to know that we are going to consistently show up for them and give them our love, and that it's not going to be conditional whether or not we're showing up and giving our love. So when we are having these moments of thinking, why haven't I made more progress? Why do I still have this wound coming up? We are telling that part that its lovability is contingent upon how it's being, which is the original source of the wound. Okay? So we're reopening that wound every time we say, why is this part still hanging around? I'm so frustrated that it's still here. Right? These exiled parts need to know that we're going to consistently show up for them. And remember, our exiled parts mostly are probably under the age of 15. A lot of our exiled parts are under the age of 8. So it's the perspective of a child, and a child that hasn't been given good reasons to trust. So that child isn't very trusting. And it probably takes a lot for that child part, that wounded part of the self, to be able to trust. And some parts may take years of consistent effort to be able to trust. And I know that that can be disconcerting for some, because we want quick fixes. And we live in this society that tells us that we should be able to have quick fixes. And that's part of the problem. So many of us have turned to quick fixes for so many years. And those quick fixes actually just exacerbated the problem. So now when we actually get sincere and serious about doing the work, we have to grieve the idea that quick fixes exist. And for some of us, that grieving process might take a long time. The truth of the matter is, these parts need to know that we're going to consistently show up for them. Think about it like a child whose dad walked out on the family and was gone for decades and then came back and all of a sudden was like, oh, hey, now I care about you. Now I'm in your life. It might take years for that child to trust that that love is going to be consistent. It's the same with our parts. And the more impatient we get with those parts, the less those parts trust that we're going to consistently show up for them. So doing as best as we can to release expectations about how long it's going to take to heal an exiled part and reintegrate that exiled part back into the system. And this takes a ton of patience. It's like being a parent for a child that has a disability. It requires being patient and loving every single day consistently. And even for the people that I know that have been doing this work for decades, they still discover wounded parts that need their love. And I do fully believe with all of my being that it is possible to unburden all of the parts of ourselves and to bring all of our exiled parts back into wholeness, to reintegrate all parts and to be able to live from self energy, which means unblended with any wounded part, to be able to live from self energy the vast majority of the time. I think it's possible to live from that self energy 90+% of the time. And that, in my mind, is the goal. And it takes consistent effort. Also recognizing that it's very hard for us to be able to see our own progress. It's like the horrible analogy of a frog boiling in water, where the temperature is getting incrementally hotter so slowly that it's imperceptible to the frog, and the frog doesn't even notice that the temperature is getting hotter until it's boiling. So if you're frustrated with yourself and you're wondering why your healing journey is taking so long, just know that it's been so gradual and incremental that you haven't noticed how much you have transformed. I promise you that if you've been putting in consistent work, you have been transforming. And remember that sometimes it looks like it's getting worse before it gets better. It's that Kyle Cease analogy of the fish tank, where he says, what happens when you stick a hose into the bottom of a fish tank that hasn't been cleaned in a long time? All the gunk comes up to the surface and it looks 10 times dirtier than it did before you started cleaning it, but actually it's getting cleaner. So sometimes these parts of ourselves get a lot louder before they're able to heal and reintegrate, because we've suppressed them for so long, because we've silenced them for so long. I mean, really think about it. Think about a part that has been put into a compartment for decades. How does that part feel? Once it finally comes out, once it finally is allowed to be seen and heard, it's going to have a shit ton to say. It's going to want to scream. It's going to want to be upset. It's going to need so much excessive love and nurturing in order to feel loved again. So yes, that process sometimes takes a lot longer than we want it to, or than we think it should. And when we're in self energy, we can see that we're not that part. That's a part that needs our love. And just like a child that is upset every single day, it's like, that's unfortunate that the child's upset every single day. And if it's upset for 400 days in a row, it still needs our love. That child still needs our love. So remembering not to identify with your parts. If you still have wounded parts that have been sticking around for years, those parts aren't you. They are a being that is in your awareness, that is wanting and needing your love. You are the giver of love. You are the loving awareness. You are the witness. It's important to not allow our ego to derive validation from how far we perceive ourselves to be on our transformational journey. True transformation is not being attached to how we feel in any given moment or what it looks like. True transformation is recognizing that we are not our internal state. So it doesn't matter if it's cloudy every single day. The weather is not us. We are the witness to the weather. The weather does not dictate who we get to be. So the work is in unblending and allowing for these parts of ourselves to be as they are, and patiently, consistently nurturing and loving them until they finally feel safe enough. Because when we're saying, I've been loving you for 2 years now, and you're still not healed, that's reinforcing the idea in the wounded part's mind that our love is conditional, and it sets us back. So we really have to be committed to our transformation, be committed to our healing, and simultaneously be unattached to what it looks like on any given day or week or month or year, and be unattached to how long it's taking. And remembering that there's nowhere to get to. Remember, the goal of willingness is not to feel better. It is to learn to feel better, to learn to be better at feeling, to learn to show up with more presence and love for whatever internal experience is arising, to love whatever is arising. It's not about forcing and manipulating our internal state to be and look a certain way. And that's the real muscle building. And for those of us for whom, I keep looking at the time because I have a session starting in 2 minutes and there's so much more that I want to say to you. For those of us for whom it takes a lot of heavy lifting, there's a reason for that. There's a reason that we chose to come into a lifetime where transformational work was going to be really hard, because it is easier for some people. Some people have less heavy lifting to do. And those of us who chose a really intense curriculum of transformation in this lifetime are those of us who really wanted to learn a lot, really wanted to expand a lot, really wanted to strengthen those muscles of transformation. So if you're feeling frustrated at how long your transformational journey is taking, take a moment to ask yourself, how is this happening for me? Why might my soul have chosen this path? Why might it have chosen for this path to take so much of my time and energy and effort? And also, just remember, it's like learning a whole new language. It does require immersion. It requires practicing it every day. And when we stop practicing it, then we forget that language. We lose it a little bit. And I really acknowledge you, all of you who are out there who have been at this for so long and have been putting so much effort in. I acknowledge you. You're doing a great job. And I'm sorry that it takes so much effort. I get it. It does for me too. You're not alone in this. And I admire your strength and your persistence.